It begins with chaos. Newscasts flash images of ecological disaster as Arizona ranchers speak in hushed tones about a plague no one can quite explain. And then without warning, we're staring into the eyes of a rabbit, not the cuddly kind. This one's in slow motion, drenched in blood, leaping through a miniature house like a kaiju in fur. For a moment, you wonder if this is a parody. It's not. Released in 1972, Night of the Lepus attempted the impossible. Turn a herd of rabbits into an army of terrifying killers. And it didn't play it for laughs. The cast, led by horror royalty Janet Leigh and sci-fi veteran DeForest Kelley, delivered lines with straight-faced dread. The soundtrack screamed apocalypse. The special effects, while primitive, were deadly serious. But what emerged wasn't just a monster movie. It was something far stranger, a film that demanded you take it seriously while showing you bunny stampedes shot in slow motion. This was no accident. Behind the scenes, the studio fought to suppress the truth that the monster was, in fact, a rabbit. Trailers were cut to hide it. Posters avoided it. And the director? He leaned all the way in treating every death, every scream, as if this were the birds. Yet beneath the fur and fake blood lies a story riddled with contradictions, abandoned effects, lost footage, and an actress who would go on to erase it from her resume. It's a film that no one wanted to remember, and yet once seen can never be forgotten. These are 20 weird facts you didn't know about Night of the Lepus, 1972. Fact: Hasson, the plague that wasn't just rabbits. The film opens like a public health announcement gone wrong. News anchors rattle off ecological statistics, warning of invasive species overrunning fragile environments. But unlike most monster movies, Night of the Lepus doesn't start with a meteor crash or secret military lab. It starts with biology. Specifically, a rabbit overpopulation crisis in the Arizona desert. Based on real environmental concerns of the late 1960s, the plot treats the rabbit plague like it's locusts or a viral outbreak. The opening montage, filled with ranchers showing carcasses and government officials calling for drastic action, creates a tone of dread far removed from the eventual absurdity. There's no wink to the audience, no signal that this is satire. The threat is real, the science is serious, and the enemy? Cute, fluffy, and multiplying uncontrollably. This strange commitment to realism is what makes the first 10 minutes so unsettling. It feels like you're watching a documentary until the film shifts. Until one rancher proposes using hormones to mutate the rabbit's breeding cycle. That's when the science goes rogue. That's when Night of the Lepus stops whispering problem and starts screaming experiment. So the question remains, was this film trying to warn us about nature or ourselves? Fact: #2 Janet Leigh didn't know what she signed up for. Janet Leigh, fresh off the legacy of Psycho, joined Night of the Lepus under the impression she'd be starring in a serious ecological thriller. The original script, titled Rabbits, pitched itself as a suspenseful reflection on man versus nature. Leigh, always drawn to cerebral horror, signed on expecting tension, not terror in bunny suits. According to production memos, the final decision to physically show the giant rabbits wasn't made until late in pre-production. Leigh reportedly voiced concerns, noting that fear often lies in what's unseen. But by then, she was locked in by contract. She did her job. She screamed on cue. She delivered lines like, "They're coming through the fence," with the same gravity she once gave Norman Bates. What makes this weirder? Leigh never promoted the film, never mentioned it in later interviews. Some accounts claim she even walked out of a private screening, saying only, "I thought I left horror behind in the shower." Did she regret the film or regret that it took itself too seriously? Fact: #3 The original title was even worse. Before it became Night of the Lepus, the script floated around under the working title Rabbits. Just that, no mystery, no drama, just rabbits. Producers worried that the bluntness would trigger laughter, not fear, so they reached into the thesaurus and found lepus, the Latin term for hair. It sounded scientific, exotic, possibly dangerous. But the change created a new problem. No one knew what a lepus was. Early trailers confused audiences. The title read like a sci-fi virus or alien species. Some viewers thought it might be a sequel to Night of the Iguana. Marketing was forced to pivot. Posters focused on terrified faces and bloody footprints, while the rabbits themselves were strategically hidden from all promotional materials. This deliberate concealment backfired. When audiences finally saw the film, the reveal of slow-motion bunny attacks drew laughter instead of screams. Critics called it a bait and switch. Fans called it camp. The studio called it a miscommunication. But maybe the bigger question is, if they'd kept the title Rabbits, would the film have earned the cult status it has today? Fact #4. The mutation scene was cut and never recovered. When scientists in the film inject hormones into a rabbit to alter its reproductive cycle, it sets off the entire chain of horror. But the most critical moment, the actual transformation, was never shown. Originally, the script included a nightmarish sequence, close-ups of blood vessels expanding, fur shifting in unnatural patterns, and glowing red eyes emerging from the darkness. Practical effects were commissioned, miniature prosthetics were built, and one deleted storyboard even suggests a gruesome lab escape scene where the rabbit slaughters lab rats before disappearing. But none of it made the final cut. Studio execs allegedly found the footage too grotesque for the film's intended PG rating. Others feared it would highlight the limitations of their effects. What's strange is that no one knows where the footage went. It wasn't in the theatrical reels. It didn't surface in TV edits. And despite multiple fan restorations, the original mutation sequence remains lost. Was it censorship or embarrassment? Fact #5. Ampere's child unleashed the apocalypse. The film's first major twist isn't a monster, it's a mistake. When the researcher's daughter, Amanda, visits the lab, she becomes attached to one particular rabbit, the one that had been injected with experimental hormone. To save it from the testing process, she secretly swaps the mutated rabbit with a normal one and takes it into the wild. It's an innocent gesture, the kind of moment you'd expect in a children's movie. But here, it's the start of disaster. Amanda releases the rabbit near an abandoned mineshaft, and the rest is history. The sequence plays eerily quiet. No thunder crash, no music sting, just a girl and a rabbit disappearing into the scrubland. Years later, film historians argued that this moment was a rare moral inversion in horror. The apocalypse didn't start with evil or greed, but with compassion. So who's to blame, the scientists, the girl, or the audience for rooting for the rabbit? Fact #6. Bloodied horses. Silent screams. The first real sign that something's wrong comes not with a roar, but with silence. A rancher finds his horse mutilated, torn open, as if attacked by a predator far larger than a rabbit. But there are no roars, no howls, just bloody hoofprints and oversized paw marks trailing into the hills. What follows is one of the film's most unnerving sequences, a man riding through the brush at night, flashlight trembling, as rustling echoes around him. He sees nothing until it's too late. A blur of fur, a guttural scream, and then silence again. The actor, uncredited in some releases, was a real stuntman who insisted on performing the rabbit attack without a double. He reportedly fought off a man in a full rabbit costume in total darkness. The footage was shot in one take, and it's still one of the film's most infamous kills. It wasn't gore that made it horrifying, it was the absence of noise. Fact #7. The army arrives, but with no guns. As mutilated bodies start piling up, local authorities escalate the crisis to the military. Helicopters arrive, trucks roll in, and suddenly, this tiny desert town is under martial law. On paper, this should have been the film's turning point from mystery to action. But the scene plays eerily wrong. The soldiers, barely armed. The dialogue, awkwardly expository. And the threat, still undefined. One character states flatly, "We're dealing with something new." But that something is never shown. Instead, we get repeated shots of concerned faces staring at off-screen chaos. Military advisors were actually consulted during production, yet much of their advice was scrapped, especially the use of real weapons. The studio feared animal rights backlash if actual gunfire was shown, even in simulation. The result? A crisis where the defenders are afraid to fire, so when the army marches in, the audience isn't reassured. They're more nervous than ever. Because if even the soldiers are confused, what hope does anyone else have? Fact #8. Miniatures, mayhem, and mismatched scale. Most of Night of the Lepus's creature effects were built on forced perspective and scale manipulation. Giant rabbits were filmed running through intricately built miniature towns, toy trains, and model cars shot in slow motion to give the illusion of weight and menace. The sets were impressive. The rabbits? Surprisingly cooperative. But there was a problem: scale drift. In some scenes, the rabbits appear 8 feet tall. In others, only slightly larger than normal. Worse, the camera sometimes cuts to real actors reacting to footage of rabbits, creating bizarre inconsistencies. A rabbit slamming into a jeep might look 20 feet long in one shot and barely human-sized in the next. One special effects artist reportedly begged the director to reshoot the continuity errors, claiming the audience would never buy it. But the budget was gone. The footage stayed, And that's how we got scenes where mutant rabbits knock over Barbie-sized houses with full orchestral terror underneath. Was the horror real, or just very, very well-lit camp? Fact #9, the blood was real. The threat was not. To add realism to the rabbit attacks, the filmmakers used actual animal blood in many scenes. According to behind-the-scenes accounts, butcher shops supplied buckets of pig's blood to be poured onto miniature sets and, in some cases, onto the rabbits themselves. The idea was to make the creatures look feral, covered in gore, driven mad by instinct. The result is jarring. A close-up of a rabbit's face, twitching calmly, while blood drips from its mouth. But if you look closely, there's no tension in its body. No aggression, just a rabbit eating lettuce, drenched in horror movie lighting. The crew tried everything: low-angle shots, red filters, fog machines, but nothing could make the rabbits snarl or growl, because they couldn't. They were rabbits. Some crew members reportedly laughed between takes. Others felt it was ethically wrong to use real blood for such a farcical effect. But the director insisted, "This is not a joke." Maybe it wasn't, but when blood runs red and the monster won't even blink, who are we really afraid of? Fact #0, the town was real, the fear was not. The pivotal sequence where the rabbits overrun a small Arizona town was filmed on location in Ajo, a real desert town with fewer than 5,000 residents. Local extras were hired to flee in panic as cameras rolled. Storefronts were dressed with bloodied mannequins. Police cruisers were set ablaze. Sirens screamed into the desert night. But once again, the illusion cracked. The rabbits inserted later via overlaid footage weren't physically present on set, so the extras had to react to empty space. Some overacted wildly, others barely flinched. One wide shot features a man calmly sipping coffee, while terror erupts behind him. Worse, the compositing was rushed. Rabbits appeared to float, shadows mismatched. One scene accidentally shows a giant rabbit phasing through a brick wall like a ghost. And yet, the scene works sort of. Not because it's convincing, but because it's unhinged. It's the kind of chaos that makes you laugh, then shiver. Because if the movie doesn't know what's real anymore, how can the audience? Fact #9. DeForest Kelley's last horror role almost ended his career. Before he became Star Trek's beloved Dr. McCoy, DeForest Kelley had dabbled in westerns and noir. Night of the Lepus marked his return to horror and nearly marked his exit from Hollywood. Kelley plays a skeptical sheriff who slowly realizes the situation is far beyond local control. His performance is grounded, controlled, and oddly human, but he hated the final product. Interviews from the 1,980 seconds quote Kelley calling the film a mistake and a contract obligation. "I wish I'd skipped." What's more bizarre? Kelley reportedly begged his agent to remove the credit from future press kits. Some early Star Trek fan conventions even refused to screen the film out of respect. It's a strange footnote in an otherwise iconic career, one of sci-fi's most respected faces, caught in a slow-motion rabbit apocalypse. Did the film damage his legacy, or just reveal how seriously he took every role? Fact #2, the grocery store siege that made no sense. In one of the film's most baffling sequences, the townspeople take refuge in a local grocery store as the rabbits approach. Windows are boarded, lights are cut, and everyone whispers as if hiding from velociraptors, not bunnies. Then the siege begins. The rabbits leap literally into the parking lot. Through forced perspective, they appear to smash glass doors, knock over shelves, and trample terrified citizens. But if you watch closely, none of it lines up. The rabbits leap and land nowhere near anything. Shelves fall with no contact. Extras flail in directions opposite the attack. What's more, the bunny roar sound effect added in post was recycled from a lion in King Solomon's Mines, 1950. It was slowed down, distorted, and dropped into the mix to make the rabbits seem more menacing. But the disconnect was impossible to miss. The monsters were silent, the soundtrack was not, and the scene? Unintentionally surreal. Was it a horror set piece, or the birth of ironic horror before irony was cool? Fact #3. The bloodbath was a model train set. For the climax, the filmmakers wanted destruction, explosions, electrocution, rabbits screaming in agony as the tide turns against them. But the budget was gone, so they turned to what they knew: miniatures. The train yard massacre was filmed entirely on a model railway diorama. Rabbits were herded into the setup using fruit and low-voltage electric pads that encouraged movement without harm. Tiny metal towers were wired with sparklers to simulate electrical surges. The plan: lure the rabbits onto the tracks and fry them. In post-production, sound designers layered in thunderous zaps, rabbit shrieks, and industrial collapse. On screen, it almost works, but only if you don't pause. Because if you do, you'll notice the trains aren't moving, the sparks don't hit anything, and one rabbit casually nibbles a prop tree while his brethren die around him. Irony of the ending? It took the smallest set to end the biggest threat. Fact Hasson 4. The hero moment was written on set. As chaos peaks, the lead scientist proposes a final gambit: reroute electrical lines to the mine entrance, lure the rabbits in, and fry them all at once. The idea is so abrupt and so conveniently explained that many assumed it was part of a reshoot. It was. The original script ended with a chemical solution being poured into the rabbit's warren, causing suffocation. But test audiences found the ending too grim, even for a horror film. So producers ordered a rewrite on set, with less than 24 hours before shooting. The new ending gave humans a clear win, allowed for spectacle, and positioned the main characters as survivors, not just witnesses. But it also introduced scientific nonsense. A line about voltage conversion across bedrock strata remains infamous among geologists. And yet, the scene plays with strange satisfaction. Sparks fly, rabbits fall, and somehow it feels earned. Was it heroism or just better PR? Fact Hasson 5. The original ending was buried. Literally, before the reshot climax, the film's final scene showed a slow zoom on the rabbit warren, now empty and silent. Then, one final rabbit emerges smaller, twitching, and followed by soft growling. The implication? The mutation survived. A sequel was possible, maybe even inevitable, but after poor test screenings, that ending was cut. Not shelved, destroyed. One crew member claims the negatives were buried in the Arizona desert, along with other discarded footage. Another says it was taped over by accident to save on film stock. Director William F. Claxton later admitted he didn't like the open ending anyway. We weren't going to make Night of the Lepus 2. One was enough. But rumors persist. Fan theories argue that the cut ending was more tonally consistent and could have changed the film's reputation from camp classic to existential horror. Is it gone forever, or just waiting to be unearthed like the monsters it buried? Fact Hasson 6. The director never worked in film again. William F. Claxton had a solid career in television before Night of the Lepus. He directed episodes of Bonanza, Little House on the Prairie, and other family-friendly staples. But this film, his only theatrical horror feature, marked the end of his work in cinema. Why? According to colleagues, Claxton never fully embraced the absurdity of the premise. He treated the script with the solemnity of a war drama. On set, he insisted actors believe in the threat. He discouraged laughter. And when test screenings failed, he blamed the marketing, not the footage. After the film's release, Claxton quietly returned to television. He never spoke publicly about Lepus again. One producer said, "It wasn't just a flop, it was something he wanted erased." Did the film ruin his trajectory or expose the limits of sincerity in a world that needed satire? Fact Hasson 7. The actors had a secret pact: never mention it. Janet Leigh, DeForest Kelley, Rory Calhoun, all seasoned pros, all veterans of drama, noir, and classic Hollywood. And yet, not one of them ever gave a full interview about Night of the Lepus. Industry whispers suggest a mutual agreement between the leads. No promotion, no commentary, no retrospectives. When asked directly about the film, Kelley would redirect the question. Leigh once replied, "Next question. Calhoun? I don't remember much. What's more, telling is what's missing." No production stills were kept. No memoirs referenced the shoot. And when Night of the Lepus was restored for DVD decades later, no cast commentaries were included because no one agreed to speak. It's as if the film wasn't just forgotten. It was buried by consent. Did they view it as a joke or as something worse? A stain on careers built on dignity? Fact Hasson 8. The VHS cover gave away the secret they tried to hide. When Night of the Lepus finally hit home video in the 1,980 seconds, it came with a shocking twist. The VHS cover showed a giant, snarling rabbit in full view. No more Latin wordplay. No more blood-smeared posters. Just the monster, front and center. It was the very thing the original marketing team had spent months hiding. But in the age of video rental stores, subtlety didn't sell. Studios needed eye-catching, shelf-grabbing horror. And what's more eye-catching than a bunny with red eyes and human blood dripping from its teeth? Ironically, this unintentional honesty worked. Lepus became a cult rental favorite, precisely because of its ridiculous premise. College students rented it to laugh. Horror fans watched it for the surreal tone. And midnight screenings turned into ironic celebrations. What the studio once feared became the film's greatest asset. So maybe the problem wasn't the rabbits. Maybe it was the shame. Fact Nine, it was screened in secret by scientists. Decades after its release, Night of the Lepus found an unexpected audience: ecologists and wildlife researchers. In the late 1990 seconds, environmental film symposiums began referencing the movie not as horror, but as accidental satire on ecological intervention. One event at a university in Colorado held a closed screening for students of environmental science. The discussion wasn't about filmmaking, but about hubris, genetic tampering, control gone wrong. Professors cited the film as a time capsule of Cold War-era anxiety about nature pushing back. The rabbits weren't the monster, the people were. The irony? A film laughed off by critics in 1972 was now used to teach environmental ethics. Not because it succeeded, but because it failed in such a revealing way. Sometimes the most ridiculous films tell the most serious truths when they don't mean to. Fact #20. It's been parodied, but never recreated. You'd think a film this campy, this infamous, would spark a remake or reboot, but it never has. Night of the Lepus remains untouched, not because studios don't remember it, but because no one dares touch it. Filmmakers have referenced it. The Simpsons, Mystery Science Theater 3000, even indie horror directors have nodded to it in posters and jokes. But a serious remake? Never. Perhaps because the original is so strange, so earnestly wrong, that any attempt to redo it would feel dishonest. It occupies a strange cinematic purgatory, too sincere to be parody, too absurd to be thriller, too memorable to be forgotten. It is a film that failed in every conventional sense, and yet it outlived dozens of better-reviewed horror flicks. What does that say about us? That we remember the ridiculous more than we do the refined? Bonus fact, the eyes never blink. There's a moment, halfway through Night of the Lepus, when the camera lingers on a rabbit's face. Not a monster, not a puppet, a real rabbit. Its nose twitches, blood drips from its fur, and its eyes dark, glassy, expressionless stare directly into the lens. It's meant to be terrifying, but it's not the blood or the lighting that unsettles. It's the stillness, the way those eyes don't blink, the way they reflect nothing, just two black orbs, indifferent to the chaos they're supposedly causing. In horror, we're trained to look for the moment when the mask slips, when the monster twitches, flinches, reveals its hunger or hatred, but rabbits don't do that. They don't snarl, they don't leer, they don't emote, and in trying to make them monstrous, the film inadvertently revealed something deeper. True fear doesn't always come with fangs. Sometimes, it just stares back blankly, quietly, without remorse. That's why the film lingers. Not because it's scary, not because it's good, but because it forces you to look at something inherently non-threatening and feel uneasy anyway. In the end, the horror wasn't in the rabbits. It was in our attempt to make them into something else. And maybe that says more about us than it ever did about them. If Night of the Lepus taught us anything, it's that even the most absurd premise can leave a lasting impression. But what do you think? Was this film an accidental masterpiece of ecological horror? Or just a cinematic misfire too weird to forget? Tell us in the comments which fact made you look twice and what forgotten film you want us to dig into next. Like, subscribe, and stay tuned, because the weird never sleeps.